episode 5, I believe. Yes, episode 5 of season 4. Uh, Joining me today is actually one of my mentors at Brooklyn College. Manuel Simons is a theater professor at Brooklyn College. I want to say he started there maybe a few years ago or so, because I remember taking acting workshop. It was like one of those acting workshop classes that was kind of like bunched together. So when I took the class, I immediately thought, oh, wait a minute, there's acting workshop 1. And then when I took the class there, it was like, man, he was like, oh, no. It's the same class. Just don't worry about it. Just don't worry about it. And yeah, from Manuel's expertise and guidance, I was really able to hone myself as an actor, especially with the limited amount of time you have as a student per semester, because if it's a fall semester, that time is going to go by so quick. If it's on a winter semester, you have some time still, because winter semesters are notoriously long and dreadful. Once, it's because it's still in the winter. I mean, not winter semester, spring semester, sorry. I still think as the spring semester as winter semester, because it's like one half is literally still winter, and then by the time you get into the other half of the semester, it's literally spring semester. So it's like, and the winter semesters are literally like 3 weeks or so, give or take. But Manuel, how did you get into theater?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on your show, on your podcast. I'm happy to be here with you, Brian.
Thank you.
Uh, my origin story of how I got into theater, it's always a powerful question for me, and maybe for a lot of other people too. Um, so I grew up in Philadelphia, outside of the city, more in the suburbs. Um, and I am a gay person. I identify as a gay non-binary person, and I didn't know anybody else like me. So I always loved theater, but I didn't have much of a community in which to explore it. So when I was little, I would um, perform little shows in my living room, and I would hide behind the drapes in the living room and come out and perform shows. And
Yeah.
I would in the bathroom, I would hide behind the shower curtain and then move the shower curtain aside and start performing when people walked in the bathroom, shocking everybody. Um, so I always loved to talk and I always loved to perform. Um, and I I didn't really have there weren't very many artistic outlets where I grew up. So there wasn't much performing arts in my schools. Um, and I didn't have a lot of friends to kind of put a club together or anything like that. There weren't things that culture in the arts wasn't really accessible to me very much as a child.
Yeah.
So I, um, at the same time, I was grappling with my sexual orientation and my identity and gender issues, and um, felt very isolated and felt very alone growing up. So at a certain point in my teen years, it got so bad for me that I actually thought about ending my own life.
Damn.
And at that time I was in middle school and I was being beaten up a lot, and I was
Yeah.
being physically abused in school by other children, and um, you know uh, being emotionally abused also, and being
Yeah.
called all kinds of names and ostracized, and um, made to feel that I was not a human being, really.
Yeah. Mm, Growing up, especially there's this thing about middle school where it's, yeah, I mean, like middle school, junior high school, what have you call it, a lot more kids can be very vindictive, even just because they just want to be. And I was a bullying victim, uh, especially for 4 years or so, because I had to literally, I had to literally stop going to school one day, and then the school was like, okay, I didn't know what to do, so they homeschooled me for like the rest of the year, and then I had to go to another school to finish up my the grade, which was, I believe, eighth grade. Yeah. So I literally missed. By the time I graduated from the eighth grade, it was like literally a year later. So yeah, there's something about middle school where kids can be still horrible, but there could be also kids who could still be wonderful. And it's very weird because there are teachers who do their best to, help people. And sure enough, you do one of the best jobs as not only as a professor, but as a human being too. But yeah, and yeah, anytime. And yeah, it's, but yeah, so
This is actually leading me to how I got into theater. So, so uh, you know, when I was young too, this was way prior to the times when bullying in schools became more of an issue.
yeah,
This was back in the day when they just said, "Oh, boys will be boys, and you just have to toughen up and deal with it." Nobody intervened, and
yeah,
it was also before the days when homeschooling was even an option. We didn't even know what that was back then. We didn't. There was no word for it.
yeah,
Pre-internet. Um, so so I was really depressed at that time. And it was right around that time that I finally saw an audition for something in the Philadelphia Inquirer, which is the paper that is still the major paper in Philadelphia. And I begged my father to take me to this audition, and I got him to agree. And I got into this play.
hmm,
Almost from the first rehearsal, the first day that I stepped into the theater to rehearse, uh, I was in a different world. I met people for the first time in my life. I met other people who were like me. I felt that I met other people who were outsiders,
yeah,
who were marginalized, and who wanted to perform, and they embraced me. So the theater was where I found a sense of belonging.
yeah,
Further, I could be anybody I wanted to be. That excited me because being myself and living my reality was not always a safe place for me.
yeah,
I found an environment of imagination where I could really exercise my imagination and be welcomed to do so and be different. And being different was okay. And being different was celebrated. So that saved my life. So that's kind of my point, is that when people say the theater or the arts saved my life, sometimes they mean it figuratively.
yeah,
They mean it abstract. But in my case, it was literal. I really believe that had I not gotten into that play, that I actually may have ended my life. And what happened was after that play, I then auditioned for the Philadelphia High School for Creative and Performing Arts, and I got accepted into that school. And it was the only school, it was 2 hours away from my home.
yeah,
The only school outside of my local public high school that I had applied to. The Performing Arts High School was also a public school, but it was one that you had to apply special to.
yeah,
I believe that if I had gone to my local high school, I either would have been killed by someone else or I would have killed myself. And I went to this performing arts high school, and there an even larger world of
just like
creativity
opened up.
opened up. Exactly, opened up to me. And I found my people. I found my tribe. I found where I belong.
Yeah.
That was the beginning of my development in theater. And then I had an amazing drama teacher in high school, and his name was Jere Sassaman, and he was a very eccentric, very colorful, openly gay man who was wonderful and a talented man who had had a career in New York, working on Broadway shows. He had spent time in Hollywood. He had amazing stories. He was a true man of the theater. He was sort of a Renaissance person, so he uh, did costuming and he did sets and he taught acting and he was an actor and a writer. He was multi-talented, and he also was open to all types of theater. So he introduced me to everything from, the most absurd plays, theater of the absurd, Pirandello, Six Characters in Search of an Author, to the most, traditional kinds of
Yeah.
plays, the plays of A.R. Gurney and The Dining Room, and everything in between. He introduced me to a lot of work by Sam Shepard, both his more abstract works and his more realistic works. He introduced me to Lorraine Hansberry and so many other great playwrights, and of course, introduced me to ancient Greek theater and Shakespeare, and really opened my mind to the possibilities of theater at that time.
Hmm.
Then I was encouraged through through my high school experiences to um, continue my theater studies. So I by that point I decided I wanted to be an actor.
Yeah.
So I knew that I had to go to New York. So I auditioned and got into the NYU's undergraduate drama program. So that's where I did my BFA, and I had ups and downs there. It was a challenging place to be at 18 years old. There
Yeah.
wasn't.
uh, not to interrupt you, but it's like every time I hear about NYU, it's like it's people will say it's a interesting place to study academically, but it's also an interesting place just socially and just uh, I guess creatively wise because like I've only been to NYU especially for some of their theater stuff like maybe a couple of times, and that
Mhm.
was only at one of the black box theaters, which I forgot what it was called, but it was like the black box. It's literally like a black box theater that's like a. It could be like literally a theater like this where it's just like you're on this side, you're on this side, you're on this side, you're on this side, or it could be like a straightforward theater where
Right.
it's just like you're here, you're here, you're here, the stage is right here,
Yep.
or something like that, and it's weird because I would go like, this is like really good acting because like I've always heard about NYU acting. I was like, oh, it's NYU acting. It's like they're probably got to be very prestigious or something like that. They're gonna be like, I go to NYU, that sort of thing. Like it's like when you hear, oh yeah, I go to NYU. It's like they have that very prestigious type of thing. Or if someone goes, oh yeah, I go to Columbia, they're like, oh yeah, they have like that little in their stuff. Not to say you don't, but it's like. Uh, but I would see these NYU plays, and I'm like, these are damn good. I'm like,
Mhm.
and but I would always hear about, oh, if you go to NYU, it's good. You gotta have either a good time there or a troubling time there, and there's no in betweens. It's like yeah, there's no in betweens of where you go with NYU. It's like, oh, you're gonna have a great time there, you gotta have a horrible time there. There's no in between. So and I know with the BFA program there, it's like one of the best places to go if you want to be a legit actor in New York. Because like
Mhm.
if you want to be there, you go to the Test School of Acting, I believe, or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's-
So yeah.
That's
So
right. And that was what I wanted at the time, and I was determined to go there. I think the price that you pay financially and emotionally can be high. Because
yes.
at the time that I went there, which was in the 1980s, and things probably are very different now, but at the time that I went there, it was an extremely competitive environment, and you weren't provided with a lot of guidance or a lot of nurturing as
Yeah.
an so you were kind of thrown into very competitive and professional environments, and there wasn't a whole lot of support for people who were still teenagers um, and doing some very intense emotionally rigorous and um, personal work. And so, I mean, the training was happening on a very high level, and the training was really strong, but it wasn't supported by guidance and nurturing. So
Yeah.
sometimes I felt I couldn't always get the most out of the training that I was receiving. Um, and there were a lot of issues. There were issues of racism, and there were issues of homophobia and transphobia that were very pervasive. I mean, they 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 have been and they continue to be very pervasive in in the arts community, in the arts industry in this country, and in theater. And at that time, none of those um, isms and none of those forms of oppression were being
Yeah.
challenged. So it was accepted, it was assumed, this is the way it is.
Yeah.
People weren't really questioning it, except for the people who were experiencing the harm.
Yeah. Uh,
So,
yeah, it's weird because like in the early '80s, right before AIDS became like a very bad pandemic, like AIDS became the like the the stigmata that it was in the 1980s. I can imagine the early '80s. It was a very freeing time. You could be by yourself or be who you were, that sort of thing. And yeah, at some place like NYU, I was like, I wouldn't be surprised if there was like the type of uh, what's the term? The type of like stuff you still see today happening there because even when it's happening behind closed doors, you know, there's still got to be someone who will be that type of person who is just a shitbag. Excuse my French, but you know,
and it was happening to me, and there was nowhere at that time. There wasn't, a hotline or an advisor who really was open to hearing that. You were discouraged from sharing that. You felt
yeah,
alone, isolated. You didn't. Those channels were not being made obvious to you. They were more being hidden from you. So your message was to suffer in silence.
yeah, and it's definitely something you still see today because not only is Broadway still partly like that because uh, there are plays where people who have I'm not talking about stuff like the Me Too movement or something like speaking out, but there are plays that have that effect, and still, you know, people are still cast because like, oh, X did this to one of the co-stars, and they still hire them because of you know it's their talent that they're hiring. It's not the person who they want to hire. It's their talent that they're bringing to the table. Sometimes,
Or their audience draw. So a
or
lot of
yeah,
it's about money. About
even though if there's someone who's a horrible person in real life, if they bring an audience to them or bring a very massive crowd to see them work, they would always go see, that person, even if they know in their heart this person is a truly despicable figure. Both, you know, well, maybe not both on stage. Well, on stage or behind the scenes,
Mhm.
people will still see them because it's that person.
Right, and it wasn't being talked about. So a lot of
Yeah,
things people didn't know in the public. They didn't know who was harassing whom. They didn't know that people were being sexually harassed and raped, and the people out in the general public didn't know that, but there were many people within the industry who did, and who were also complicit and enabling that, which is why the culprits or the people who are the predators are, it's not just the people who are actually committing those acts. While it is them, it's also all of the enablers around them who are all saying yes
yeah,
implicitly to that and turning a blind eye. And that was a lot of what was happening back then. This is the mid 1980s we're talking
yeah,
about. It was a very different time. Things have changed a great deal since that time. However, there is a lot more that needs to change, and we're seeing this process unfold right before our eyes.
yeah,
But it's interesting because those experiences that I had at NYU, especially some of the encounters of homophobia that I had from my acting teachers, are what planted the seed in me to create my solo show.
hmm,
The anger and the anger and the pain from that experience was the seed that ultimately drove me years later to create a solo show
yeah.
around some of those issues. So I'm sure we'll talk about that
Yeah,
today.
I was literally about to ask you, how did you get? Because I literally was going to segue right into the solo stuff. It's like now that you planted those seeds, like not even though a lot of this stuff was like planting these seeds of just like being around people who could be disheartening, and there could be people who could be very supportive, and even that sort of like mindset. How did you actually? And the weird thing is that I tried to take your solo class last year, but I think I couldn't have it. I didn't have enough credits or something like that, or something amount of credits. And I saw the people who were in the solo show, and some of my friends were still in that too. And a lot of that work was like really incredible. And you told me like maybe sometime either after the show or maybe even messaging me is like this was like maybe 1/3 of the stuff that they wrote. So in terms of working a solo show and having that mindset, like what is the process to go into a solo performance? Because a one person show is like literally one monologue, but it's like a monologue that's probably like maybe split into parts or something to that nature. Because John Leguizamo, he has his own type of like one person show to do, and it's hilarious and also very interesting to know because he's also talking about stuff that that he's experienced in his sort of thing. I'm drawing blanks of other one person shows, but yeah, it's and then
Well,
there'd be like and then there would be like that one person show that's kind of like very spoofed on, which is basically only like 5 people will show up, and it's just like one person who does like this very not beatbox, like this poetry s type of thing, where it's just like you don't understand why they're doing it. So yeah,
well, there's all kinds of solo shows. And it's interesting you mentioned John Leguizamo because I came up in New York in the mid '80s and '90s, and that was a real there was a real explosion of solo work happening at that time. So we had John Leguizamo, we had Whoopi Goldberg, who had a real tremendously successful solo show that was really the beginning of her career.
Hmm.
She started at the Public Theater doing a solo show, and well, not the Public. I'm sorry, it wasn't the Public Theater. It was a different downtown off Broadway house. But she started there, and then her show moved to Broadway. Same thing happened with Leguizamo, who started at the American Place Theater, where I have also done work, and then moved to Broadway later. And so you had John Leguizamo, you had Whoopi Goldberg, you had Anna Devere Smith with her
Yeah.
documentary theater, Fires in the Mirror and Twilight Los Angeles, and then more beyond that. Um, and you had people like Tim Miller from San Francisco, um, and Marga Gomez doing solo work. So you had a whole plethora of amazing solo artists who were really the progenitors, the people who came before wonderful people like Sarah Jones today. So, and there's many more that I could name. So I was surrounded by a lot of that solo performance, and it was happening also in my community. My own friends started doing solo performance. So one of the things that I would say to people who are emerging artists or young artists, if there's something that you want to do, if you have a dream of creating a solo show, then either get yourself in a class that is devoted to solo performance, or get yourself around people who are doing it.
Yeah.
So, whatever that thing is, maybe it's not solo performance for you, maybe it's directing, or maybe it's scenography, or maybe it's costuming, or whatever area of the arts you want to be in. Get yourself around people who are doing it, because you learn so much that way by being around other artists. So I had friends who were creating solo shows. At the time, I remember I felt incredibly jealous of my friends because I was yearning to do it, but not sure how. And then I had some friends who were doing it, and I was so jealous of them, but I was around them, and they were constantly talking with me about their work. I was reading drafts of their work.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's also a lesson too about those you feel jealous of, move towards those folks, not away from those folks. Because
Yeah.
those people are the people that have something you need to learn. So I I I did that. I moved closer to those people, and I learned so much from them about writing, about performing. So that's really how I got itching to do solo performance. And then after that, I also then took classes, went and took class, and I took a great course about solo performance. Um, and I did my own work, and then I started I took a few different courses in solo performance, and from those experiences, I started to perform excerpts of work that I was creating at small venues like Dixon Place and Here Art Center, off Broadway venues, which
Yeah.
were wonderful and really open to that work. So that was my beginnings in solo performance. And then through those experiences, I started to form in my own mind ideas about the kind of solo show that I wanted to create. So there are many types of solo performance, as you were saying.
Yeah.
So a lot of solo shows are sort of a patchwork of material on a theme where it's not necessarily a linear narrative, where you just see maybe scenes from a person's life or different aspects of their life or their ideas. maybe they always have an arc to them. They always have a
Yeah.
beginning, middle, and end, but they don't always tell a narrative story that has one protagonist and sort of that classic journey that a protagonist goes on. And then other solo shows do that. They do tell you a story of one person.
Yeah.
And then there's other kinds of solo work that's spoken word, poetry types of pieces, um, hip hop theater works, all kinds of electronic and digital interfacing solo work. So there's so many different types. But had realized from the shows that I had seen and started reading that I wanted to do a solo show that told a narrative that had one protagonist and then many other supporting characters, a villain and supporting roles and various characters that the protagonist would meet along the journey and sort of a journey of self-discovery and acceptance. So my play was called Queer in the USA, and so it focuses on one character whose name is Johnny, and he's 14 years old, and he is a closeted young man in New Jersey. He grew up in Freehold, New Jersey, and he grows up at being teased relentlessly because when he sings a lot like Barbara Streisand.
Yeah.
In a very in a soprano in a soprano register, and but yet he dreams of being someone like Bruce Springsteen, who comes from Freehold, the same town that Johnny, my protagonist, was born in. So he is teased a lot and made fun of a lot in school for not only his perceived sexual orientation but for his gender identity too. Because when he sings, he sounds like a girl instead of sounding like what people think a boy is supposed to sound like.
Yeah.
So he runs away and then he goes to New York and he meets a whole series of characters that help him on his journey of coming out. And in a fantasy sequence, he even meets the boss, Bruce Springsteen himself. So and he falls in love, and he also meets a woman who identifies as a part of the Roma people, what we would call a gypsy,
Mm.
but they're known as the Roma people, and she has a lot to teach him also along the way about identity and about um, human rights
Yeah.
and his identity and his own sense of self and human rights. So through these characters, he starts to find he starts to own his true voice. It was always there, but he starts to own it.
Yeah.
So I play all of these different roles. So there's 8 different characters in the story, and I play all the different roles. Although
Even
the
Springsteen.
is done. So
Wow.
that was how I got into writing the show. I think I immersed myself in that art form, and then I through that developed an idea of the type of show that I wanted to create.
Hmm.
Classes, and I experimented and I started sort of brick by brick and step by step and little by little. I mean, that's how everything really happens. There are
Yeah.
no overnight successes. Um,
And that's the great thing about theater is that there is no right or wrong. There is no theater is literally a freeing experience. You could have someone who is not the best of actors, but they could easily still have the most okay performances and still show what they could do. Like they could, they could not be the best of actors. I'm not naming names, but I've seen this on film too. Is like they cannot be the best of actors, but the director knows what type of style they can do, and there's like, hey, just do this. Just don't say anything, but just be more mindful about your presence and So that sort of thing. And that's the great thing about theater too, is that you don't have to be a great actor too to be an actor. I mean, you have to have some capable, bleh. You have to have some capability of acting. You have to have some background of like, this is your line, say this line, not in a very flat monotone or something like that, or else your director will give you hell and high water. It was like, you know, put some emotion into it. Like, you don't have to have. What I'm trying to say is, you don't have to have a acting background where it's like, oh, like I'm from NYU or I'm from Columbia School of Acting, or I went to Stella Adler studio, or I went to the actor studio, that sort of thing. You could literally be like a teacher, like a legit, someone who does teaching for a living, and go through a thing where it's like, oh, every weekend or so I perform Claudius I perform the role of Claudius in a Shakespeare abridged thing. I'm like, and you do this like every weekend? I'm like, yeah, it's just something I do for fun. So yeah, theater is a freeing and fun experience. So it's like, and just doing theater allows you to like open up other doors. For me, I could, unless you could probably be helping me like full fundingly, like not like full fundingly, but like full mentoring me on like how to do a solo show. I honestly think I could not do like a solo show that isn't like an hour and like 90 minutes long. Like maybe 45 minutes, 30 minutes, like something like that. Something that's like very abridged take of my life.
Mm-hmm.
But theater has opened doors for me to do directing, playwriting, sound design, somewhat. It made me appreciate doing set work a lot more than I did previously, because when I did set work, I'm like, oh, this is set work. I gotta do all this. I gotta handle all this. But when I'm doing set work, I'm like, just give me some tools. Let me do what I need to do. And like 5 minutes later, anything that you need to do, and it's like, right on. Costume work, even though I've never really done costume work, I do appreciate people who do costume work, because that takes a lot of credit to do. Yeah, it's like theater has, and bring it back to what I was just saying before. Theater brings back, theater opens up a lot more doors than you just realize, because people when they think of theater, they think of, oh, it's just acting on stage or something like that. It's more than just acting, which is and what you just said is like, especially with the people who you mentioned, your friends, the people you've worked with in school, they helped you like literally almost step by step into creating the show that that is like you just mentioned, you're playing in characters. That means like, oh, you need to do a quick costume change like every single other scene. So you don't have, or I assume there two characters can't be there at the same time, because if you do that, that's like legitimately hard to do. So
No, actually, I had several scenes where two characters were there at the same time.
oh wow.
So yeah, there's lots of techniques. I mean, that's one of the things that I also work on and teach in my solo performance classes. How you can switch from character to character and keep it clear about who you are in each moment, so that the audience can read the change and understand that there's a dialogue happening between two people.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's no costume change at all, but it's a vocal and physical change that you make. Or sometimes there's a very minimal costume change, so that it allows the dialogue to flow freely. But many things you said are so important in terms of theater creating. So one point that you're making about theater is that it's a collaborative art form.
Yeah.
Even solo performance is a collaborative art form. So there were still people that helped me in my development process. When I created my solo show, I did a lot of readings. So I made sure that I had other people involved, getting feedback from other artists, people that I trusted and people that I respected, coming to my readings, giving me feedback, talking with me about the work. I shared it with people in the theater company, the Faux Real Theater Company, it's called, which is the company that I've been part of for more than 20 years.
Yeah.
I shared it with my friends, my mentors, all of my community, that the people that I trusted and respected, and so I got a lot of feedback, and I worked with a director. So I think in solo performance, especially when you've written your own work, it's very helpful to work with a director because you need that outside eye.
Yeah.
So I had a very close relationship with a wonderful director, um, and uh, the point is that I had other people in my life, who I shared my work with. So even though it's called solo performance or solo theater, you're definitely not doing it all by yourself.
Yeah.
And I had to work with technicians and other people to do the tech and help me design the show, and so that was really important. At the same time, another important thing that you said is that as somebody coming up in the theater, when you're in your process of learning and training, which hopefully never stops,
Yeah.
you you want to expose yourself to as many areas as possible. Like you said, even the areas you think you might not like at first, like the technical side and set design and set building and lighting design and being a lighting technician and all of the various aspects. Because when you do a solo show, you're going to have some hand in all of that.
Yeah.
So I did, even though I had a director, I needed to be able to work very closely with my director. I gave input on the costume design, on the set design, on the props, on lighting, on sound. It was all very collaborative. So having had some exposure to those things in my career, just as a student and just as a person who's curious about all aspects of the theater, was very helpful to me, um, in presenting and creating my own work. So that's why I always do encourage people to expose themselves to as many areas of theater making as possible. And the other thing I would say is I do think that training is important and that study is important, as in any field. If you want to be great at something, it helps to study it with good people.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that you have to be doing it at NYU or Juilliard or Yale. Um, you can find some of the best people right in your own neighborhood sometimes. Um, I think Brooklyn College is an example of that, and
Not to their own horn, but yeah.
I'm not saying that because I teach there, but I'm saying that in recognition of my peers, the other faculty that I've met there who are incredibly talented. And I didn't know that until I started working at Brooklyn College and saw who was there and what I was exposed to.
Yeah.
So it shows, that that sometimes there's a lot of mythology about what we may have heard through the grapevine or heard from elders or read in a magazine article about what people say is the best. And
Yeah.
I think it's really important to question that information, because just because something is called the best by someone who wrote a magazine article or by someone who went to a school 20 years earlier doesn't mean that that situation is the best for you in your journey. So it's really important to look at things and question what you're hearing. I'm not saying that NYU and Juilliard
Of
and
course not.
might not be wonderful for some people. But it doesn't mean that those institutions are not the only places where you can receive high quality training that is going to nurture you as an artist. And in some cases, those may not be the places where you will find that.